For today's lesson, we're going to introduce analog and digital sensors. We're going to begin discussing different types of sensors, specifically analog and digital. We're going to talk about the difference between the two, and we're going to talk about a few digital sensors. So I want you for the do now to answer the question, what is the difference between an analog and digital watch? Those are, something we should be familiar with. If you are not familiar with what an analog or digital watch is, Google an analog or digital watch. A digital watch looks something like this. It'll have the numbers. Let's say it's 133. It'll be like a little boxy 3. It's like a lot of those Casio watches are digital. Maybe the seconds will be down here, and then it'll flip over to 134, and so on. So this is a digital watch. Well, an analog watch is, your classic watch that, has your second hand, your minute hand, and your hour hand. And it'll tell you what time it is based off of that. And every single hand moves at least a little bit altogether. So as the second hand moves, the hour hand moves ever so slightly. So this is an analog watch. Now, how does this apply to sensors? Well, we have analog and digital sensors. Just like a digital watch, a digital sensor will go up one step at a time. Like we go from 133 to 134, 135, and so on and so forth, and we build minutes that way. While an analog sensor will get many values, gets decimal values, has little tiny, has sensitivity between little tiny values. So if you were to look at the graph of a digital sensor, so the x-axis here is time, and the y-axis is value. This is a digital sensor. You might start with a 0 value. So let's say this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, time 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, or it might be milliseconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. So, from 0 to 1, the value might be 0, and then it gets some sort of input. Someone presses a button, and it'll jump right up to 1. There is no steady rise from 0 to 1. It's just a step function. And then maybe the button gets let's go, and it goes back down. Maybe the button needs to be pressed several times, and as it gets pressed more and more times, the value will increase, and then suddenly decrease if it lets go. But the graph will always look like these steps. Probably remember from math, I hope, step functions. So a digital sensor will always give you values as a step function. Whereas an analog sensor, if we were to graph value over time for an analog sensor, the graph might look like this. Maybe it'll be a line, drop down, but it won't jump. It won't make steps. It'll only jump. It could jump down to like 0 right away if you let go of something. So that's an analog sensor. So that's the difference there. So the difference boils down to a digital sensor can only take step values, whereas an analog sensor can take more smaller values. So let's say we're measuring distance. A digital sensor might give us 10 inch, 9 inch, 8 inches, 7 inches, only in inches, whereas an analog sensor could tell us down to the thousandth of an inch how far we are from something. Okay, so with that, let's talk about some digital sensors. So let's click on that. Okay, so the first digital sensor I want to talk about is a limit switch. This is a limit switch. It has a little flag on the end, and when you press this flag, there's a little button in here that gets pressed. This is the ones we would work with in class. And you'll notice that it has a PWM cable similar to the ones that you used for your motors when we worked on our claw bots. And basically when this button is pressed, when this flag is pressed down and the button inside is pressed, it sends a value of 1. And when it's not pressed, it sends a value of 0. And you can use that in code to, say, have certain actions. Let's say you had one of these at the bottom of your clawbot or at the top of your clawbot, like where the claw is moving up and down. You can have the claw move up until this limit switch senses 1, and then it stops and holds it as long as it senses 1. So first digital sensor is a limit switch. And I'll put that right down on the pad. You should be able to see that in the corner of your screen. Moving on, bumper switch. You might have seen these as well. Bumper switch. This is another digital sensor. It works almost identically. There are lots of variations of limit switches. They're basically all the same. You press a button, you get a 1. You let go, you get a 0. Sometimes it's vice versa, and the default when it's not pressed is 1, and when it is pressed is 0. It depends on the sensor. So whenever you're using a button type of switch or sensor, you always want to check your code and actually test it out to make sure that you have it straight, which one is 0 and which one is 1, because you could, cause a terrible accident by not understanding those. A common place where we see limit switches is right here on my keyboard. I have all of these buttons. Each of these buttons get a 0 or a 1. So it's 0 if not pressed, 1 if pressed, or maybe it's the reverse. But the point is the computer senses that and it's able to type based on the input I give. Okay. So far limit switch and bumper switch. Let's keep moving. Potentiometer. So a potentiometer is something that gives you angle. So it tells you, you put an axle through here. So if you look at the hole, you put an axle through here, and it will sense an angle. This particular one goes from 0 to 270 degrees, and it'll only return to you 0 degrees, 1 degrees, 2 degrees. It won't give you half a degree. It won't give you between 1 and 2. It'll just give you 0, 1, 2, all the way to 270. It will not be able to do any decimals. So this is a potentiometer, and it gives angle. So again, if you have an axle going through here, that axle or shaft turns, and the potentiometer will tell you what angle it's at. So let's say you have your clawbot and you want to bring it up to a certain angle. You would attach this to the end of your shaft, and this PWM cable will send information back to your code of what angle you're at. But it's a little bit inaccurate. Now, the potentiometer is the last one we're going to talk about today. And the thing I want to say about a potentiometer is it might occur to you guys that, hold on, are potentiometers always digital sensors? And the answer is no. A lot of the times they're analog. A lot of the times they are made so they actually do return values between angles. So you get 1.333 degrees. So that does happen. So, potentiometers are not always analog sensors. And there are they're not always digital sensors. Most of the time they're actually analog sensors. A lot of the analog sensors we're going to talk about on Wednesday are actually also sometimes digital sensors. It really depends on the manufacturing and use case. Because sometimes you don't need that precision that an analog sensor provides. It all depends on what your application is. Okay, so just to review the sensors we talked about. So digital sensors, we talked about limit switches and bumper switches, which is the base kind. You get a 0 or a 1. And then a potentiometer, which gives angle, which can be a digital or an analog sensor. Here's the difference between a digital and analog sensor in terms of the values you get, digital and analog watch. Let's see if there's any other sensor. I think there was one more I wanted to talk to you guys about before I let you go. These are all digital sensors. There are also some light sensors. So this is a Vex light sensor, and it actually works as an analog, but if you think about it, a light sensor can also work as a digital. It can either sense light or not sense light. It depends on the use case. So I'll leave it here. Your homework for today is going to be posted on Google Classroom, so just go to the classwork and you can look that up, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.